Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the cold viewport of the research station, watching the Galactic Council's warships form a blockade around the asteroid field. 27 massive dreadnoughts, their weapons trained on the rocky debris where the last clutch of draconian eggs lay hidden. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, a human xenobiologist, was the only thing standing between an entire species and extinction. The communication panel crackled to life, and Admiral Vextar's reptilian face filled the screen. His yellow eyes gleamed with barely contained aggression as he spoke in the Universal Translator's mechanical voice. Dr. Chen, you have 6 standard hours to evacuate the research station. The draconian threat must be eliminated before the eggs hatch. This is not a request. Sarah turned away from the viewport, her brown hair catching the artificial light. Admiral, these are hatchlings we're talking about, babies. They haven't done anything wrong. The draconians destroyed 17 worlds before we finally defeated them. Vextar hissed. Their adult forms are living weapons of mass destruction. Each one can level a city with their plasma breath, and their scales deflect our strongest weapons. We cannot allow even one to survive. The connection ended abruptly, leaving Sarah alone in the humming silence of the station. She walked through the corridor she had called home for the past 3 months, past the laboratories where she had studied the remarkable biology of the dragon-like aliens. The draconians had been magnificent creatures, standing 12 feet tall with iridescent scales that shifted from deep purple to silver. Their intelligence had rivaled any species in the galaxy, but their territorial nature and immense, destructive capabilities had made them enemies of every civilization they encountered. Sarah reached the secure vault where the 37 draconian eggs were stored in climate-controlled chambers. Each egg was about the size of a watermelon, with scales that seemed to shift and move in the artificial light. According to her calculations, they would hatch within the next 72 hours. The Galactic Council wanted to destroy them before that happened, convinced that baby dragons would be just as dangerous as their parents. But Sarah had spent months studying draconian biology and behavior patterns from recovered data. She had discovered something the Council refused to acknowledge. Young draconians weren't born with their destructive capabilities. Their plasma glands didn't develop until they reached maturity at around 50 years of age. The hatchlings would be vulnerable, dependent, and completely harmless for decades. She activated her personal communicator and sent a message to her research partner, Dr. James Rodriguez, who was currently on Earth presenting their findings to the Human Colonial Authority. James, they're going to destroy the eggs. The Council won't listen to our research. I'm not evacuating. Someone has to protect them. The response came back within minutes. Sarah, don't do anything crazy. The authority is reviewing our data. We might be able to get an injunction. There's no time for legal proceedings. The eggs are starting to show movement. They'll hatch soon. Sarah sealed the communication and began making preparations. She activated the station's defensive shields, knowing they wouldn't hold against the Council's weapons for long. Then she started moving the eggs to the station's most protected area, the emergency shelter designed to withstand asteroid impacts. As she carefully transported each precious egg, Sarah thought about the data she had collected. The draconians had been nomadic, traveling between star systems in great migrations. The aggression that had led to the war seemed to be triggered by territorial disputes over nesting sites. If the Council would just listen, they might understand that the species wasn't inherently evil. The first egg began to crack as Sarah placed it in the shelter. A tiny snout emerged, followed by large, curious eyes that looked remarkably similar to those of Earth's lizards. The baby draconian was no bigger than a house cat, with soft, pliable scales and wings too small for flight. It looked up at Sarah and made a sound like a bird's chirp. "Hello there, little one," Sarah whispered, gently stroking the hatchling's head. The baby responded by nuzzling against her hand, obviously seeking warmth and comfort. More eggs began hatching over the next hour. Soon Sarah was surrounded by 37 tiny dragons, all chirping and crawling around the shelter. They showed no signs of aggression, only the typical behavior of newborns seeking food and security. Sarah had prepared a nutrient paste based on her analysis of draconian biology, and the hatchlings eagerly consumed it. The communication panel in the shelter activated, and Admiral Vextar's face appeared again. "Dr. Chen, our sensors indicate the eggs are hatching. Evacuate immediately or we will consider you a combatant. Admiral, please look at the data I'm transmitting. These babies are harmless. They don't develop their destructive capabilities for decades. We have time to study them, to understand their species better. The Council's decision is final. You have 30 minutes. The transmission ended and Sarah looked down at the tiny dragons clustered around her feet. One had climbed onto her lap and fallen asleep, its small body rising and falling with each breath. How could anyone see these creatures as monsters? She activated the station's emergency beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Dr. Sarah Chen of the Xenobiology Research Station Gamma 7. I am requesting assistance from any vessel in the area. The Galactic Council is about to commit genocide against a species of infant aliens who pose no threat to anyone. The response surprised her. Captain Maria Santos of the human cargo vessel Esperanza answered first. Dr. Chen, this is Santos. We're about 12 hours out, but we're changing course to your position. More voices joined the channel. Captain Lee of the research ship Discovery, Commander Jackson of the patrol vessel Defiance, even some non-human voices, including Captain Zarak of a Altarian merchant ship and Commander Thess of a Centauri medical vessel. The cavalry's coming, Dr. Chen, Captain Santos said. Hold tight. Sarah looked at the peaceful hatchlings around her and smiled. Maybe there was hope after all. She began preparing for the longest 30 minutes of her life, knowing that the fate of an entire species rested in her hands. Outside the shelter, the Council's warships moved into attack position, their weapons charging for the final strike. The research station shuddered as the Council's warning shots impacted the outer hull. Sarah held 3 of the smallest hatchlings against her chest, feeling their tiny hearts beating rapidly. The baby dragons sensed the danger and huddled closer together, their scales shifting to darker colors in what she recognized as a stress response. Warning shots. Dr. Chen, Admiral Vextar's voice crackled through the damaged communication system. Your allies are still hours away. Surrender the creatures now and we will grant you safe passage. Sarah looked down at the hatchling in her arms. It had wrapped its tiny tail around her wrist and was making soft musical sounds that reminded her of whale songs. According to her research, these vocalizations were how young draconians communicated with their parents. The babies were calling for protection and she was the only one who could hear them. I won't abandon them, she replied firmly. These babies didn't choose to be born into a galaxy that fears them. Someone has to give them a chance. The station's artificial intelligence area spoke in her calm, synthetic voice. Dr. Chen, structural integrity is at 73% and falling. The emergency shelter can withstand direct weapons fire for approximately 47 minutes. Sarah began moving around the shelter, gathering supplies and equipment. If she was going to make a stand, she needed to be prepared. The hatchlings followed her movements with curious eyes, some attempting to walk on their unsteady legs while others crawled using their small wings for balance. The largest of the babies, which Sarah had mentally nicknamed Rex, was already showing signs of advanced intelligence. It watched her collect medical supplies and began organizing the other hatchlings into groups, using body language and soft chirps to guide them to safer areas of the shelter. Area, can you show me the approaching ships? A holographic display materialized in the center of the shelter, showing the tactical situation. The Council's blockade formed a tight ring around the asteroid field, while 23 vessels of various designs approached from different vectors. Sarah's heart swelled as she recognized the mix of human and alien ships coming to her aid. Captain Santos's voice came through the communication system. Dr. Chen, this is the Esperanza. We've got 17 human vessels, 4 Altarian ships and 2 Centauri medical cruisers. The Council boys don't look too happy about the party crashers. Captain Santos, be careful. They have overwhelming firepower. Don't you worry about us, Doc. We've got a few surprises of our own. The station shook again, this time from a more direct hit. Several of the hatchlings squeaked in alarm and Sarah quickly moved to comfort them. She noticed that Rex was trying to shield the smaller babies with his wings, despite being barely larger than them himself. Admiral Vextar's image appeared on the communication screen, his expression showing barely controlled rage. Dr. Chen, you are harboring a clear threat to galactic security. Any vessels approaching this station will be considered hostile and fired upon. Admiral, came a new voice. This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Human Colonial Authority. We have obtained a temporary injunction from the Galactic Court prohibiting any action against the research station or its occupants until a full hearing can be conducted. Vextar's eyes narrowed. The court has no jurisdiction over matters of immediate galactic security. The court disagrees. Dr. Chen's research indicates that these hatchlings pose no immediate threat. We are requesting a 72-hour moratorium on any military action to allow for proper evaluation. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but it was short-lived. Vextar's response was swift and brutal. The Council rejects the court's authority in this matter. We will complete our mission. The communication ended, and almost immediately the Council ships opened fire, not on the research station, but on the approaching rescue vessels. Sarah watched in horror as energy beams and plasma bursts lit up the space around the asteroid field. But the human and allied ships had come prepared. Their shields held against the initial barrage, and they began returning fire with surprising effectiveness. The cargo ship Esperanza deployed what looked like standard shipping containers, but Sarah realized they were actually weapons platforms as they began targeting the Council ships with precise beam weapons. Clever, Arya observed. The rescue fleet has disguised military-grade equipment as civilian cargo. The Council forces appear to have underestimated human ingenuity. The battle raged around the asteroid field while Sarah tended to the increasingly agitated hatchlings. The baby dragons could sense the violence happening outside their shelter, and several of them had begun making distress calls that sounded heartbreakingly similar to crying children. Rex crawled over to Sarah and tugged at her pant leg with his tiny claws. When she looked down, he gestured toward the other babies and then toward the emergency supplies. Sarah realized he was asking how he could help care for his siblings. "You're already helping, Rex," she said softly, gently stroking his scaled head. "You're being brave for them." The hatchling seemed to understand her tone, if not her words. He chirped once and returned to organizing the other babies into what Sarah recognized as a defensive formation from her studies of adult draconian behavior. Even at this young age, their instincts for protection and organization were remarkable. Arya's voice interrupted her observations. "Dr. Chen, I am detecting an unauthorized transmission from the station." "What kind of transmission?" "Unknown. The signal appears to be originating from the emergency shelter." Sarah looked around in confusion until she noticed Rex standing near the communication panel, his small body pressed against the console. The baby dragon was somehow interfacing with the station's systems, transmitting the distress calls of his siblings across all frequencies. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The sounds of 37 baby dragons calling for help echoed across the communication channels, reaching every ship in the battle zone. The alien species in the rescue fleet responded first, their own parental instincts triggered by the unmistakable sounds of young creatures in danger. Captain Zirak's voice, translated through the universal communicator, carried obvious emotion. "By the ancient codes, those are children crying for help. No honorable being can ignore such a call." The tide of the battle began to turn as more ships broke off from the main engagement to form a protective barrier around the research station. Even some of the Council ships seemed to hesitate as their crews heard the heartbreaking distress calls. Admiral Vextar's voice cut through the channels, filled with rage. "Do not be deceived by their apparent helplessness. They are predators in infant form, no different from their genocidal parents." But doubt was beginning to spread through the Council forces. Sarah could hear the uncertainty in the communications between their ships. The sound of crying babies was having an effect that all her scientific data and legal arguments could not achieve. Rex looked up at Sarah with his large, intelligent eyes, and she realized that the baby dragon had just done something extraordinary. He had reached out across the galaxy's communication networks and made his species' case for survival in the only language that transcended politics and prejudice. The language of a child, asking for protection. The emergency shelter had become a nursery of sorts, with Sarah moving between the hatchlings like an exhausted mother, caring for 37 babies at once. The little dragons had settled into various groups based on personality and size. The shy ones clustered near the back wall, while the more adventurous babies explored every corner of their temporary home. Outside, the battle continued, but the dynamics had shifted dramatically. The distress calls broadcast by Rex had reached ships throughout the sector. Sarah watched through Arya's tactical display as vessels arrived from every direction. Not warships, but civilian craft, merchant vessels, research ships, even pleasure yachts. All coming to protect children they had never seen, of a species many had feared. "This is Captain Yara of the cetacean research vessel Deep Song," came a new voice over the communications. "We're marine biologists from the Alpha Centauri system. Those vocalizations. They're identical to the distress calls of Earth whales. These babies are calling for their families. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she looked down at the hatchlings. Rex had positioned himself at the communication console again, his small body somehow interfacing with the system to maintain the transmission. The other babies had formed a circle around him, adding their voices to the call that was now reaching across the galaxy. Admiral Vextar's fleet found itself surrounded by over 200 vessels of every size and description. His weapons were more powerful, but he was vastly outnumbered. More importantly, Sarah could see the hesitation in his own forces. Several council ships had stopped firing altogether. "Admiral," came a voice from one of his own vessels. "This is Commander Thex of the CNS Retribution. My crew is requesting clarification on our mission parameters. Are we really going to fire on children?" "Those are not children," Vextar snapped. "They are future destroyers of worlds." But his words rang hollow against the backdrop of baby dragon distress calls echoing through space. Sarah noticed that even among the council ships, crew members were asking the same questions. Aria announced a new development. "Dr. Chen, I'm detecting massive hyperspace signatures incoming. Multiple capital-class vessels." Sarah's heart sank, thinking Vexitar had called for reinforcements. But as the ships emerged from hyperspace, she saw they bore the markings of the Galactic Court's peacekeeping force. "This is Fleet Admiral Cora of the Court Enforcement Division," announced a stern female voice. "By order of the Emergency Council of the Galactic Court, all hostile actions in this sector will cease immediately. Any vessel that continues to engage in combat will be considered in violation of galactic law." The arrival of the Court's forces changed everything. Admiral Vextar's ships were powerful, but they were no match for the Court's massive peacekeeping dreadnoughts. Reluctantly, both sides began standing down their weapons. Sarah used the temporary ceasefire to check on each of the hatchlings individually. Most were healthy and alert, but 3 of the smallest showed signs of stress-induced illness. Their scales had dulled to a grayish color, and they were barely responding to stimuli. "Arya, I need to get these 3 to the medical bay. They're not doing well." "Dr. Chen, medical scanners indicate the affected hatchlings require immediate nutritional supplementation and temperature regulation. However, leaving the shelter would expose you to potential weapons fire if hostilities resume." Sarah looked down at the 3 sick babies in her arms. They were so small, so fragile. She couldn't let them die because she was afraid to leave the safety of the shelter. Rex seemed to sense her dilemma. The little dragon moved to the sick babies and began making a different kind of vocalization, something Sarah recognized from her research as a healing song. Adult draconians used these sounds to promote healing in their young. Within minutes, the other hatchlings joined in, their combined voices creating a harmonious melody that filled the shelter. Sarah watched in amazement as the sick babies began to respond, their scales slowly regaining color and their eyes becoming more alert. "Remarkable," Arya observed. "Biometric readings indicate that the vocalizations are actually triggering physiological responses in the affected subjects. Their stress hormones are decreasing and cellular regeneration is accelerating." The baby dragons were healing each other through song. Sarah had never seen anything like it in all her years of xenobiological study. She quickly began recording everything, knowing this behavior would be crucial evidence for their case. Fleet Admiral Cora's voice came through the communication system. "Dr. Chen, this is Admiral Cora. I'm requesting permission to send a medical team to evaluate the situation." "Permission granted, Admiral. But please, no sudden movements or loud noises. These babies have been through enough trauma." 20 minutes later, the airlock opened and 3 figures in environmental suits entered the station. Sarah recognized the lead figure as a Valdorian, one of the galaxy's most respected medical species. The other 2 appeared to be human and Centauri medical specialists. Dr. Voss, the Valdorian chief medical officer, stopped in amazement when he entered the shelter. The hatchlings had arranged themselves in a perfect spiral pattern around Rex, who continued to broadcast their healing song throughout the station. The scene was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "By the ancestors," Dr. Voss whispered through his translator. "I have never seen such organized cooperative behavior in newborn creatures of any species. These young ones are displaying empathy, leadership, and complex social structures that most species don't develop for years." Sarah stepped forward, still cradling the 3 recovering babies. "Doctor, I've been studying their behavior since they hatched. They're nothing like what the Council claims. They're intelligent, social, and completely non-aggressive. Dr. Voss carefully approached Rex, who looked up at the alien doctor with curious but unafraid eyes. The baby dragon extended one tiny wing in what Sarah recognized as a greeting gesture. "May I?" Dr. Voss asked softly. Sarah nodded, and the doctor gently took Rex's wing in his gloved hand. The baby dragon immediately began making soft, musical sounds that needed no translation. He was saying hello. The Centauri specialist, Dr. Mira, was recording everything on her medical scanner. The neural activity readings are incredible. These hatchlings are showing cognitive development levels equivalent to a 5-year-old child of most sentient species. And the healing behavior we just witnessed, added Dr. Kim, the human specialist, suggests a level of emotional intelligence that surpasses many adult species. They recognized their siblings' distress and responded with coordinated therapeutic action. Dr. Voss stood slowly, his four-armed form radiating dignity and authority. "Dr. Chen, I am prepared to testify before the Galactic Court that these creatures represent no immediate threat to galactic security. Furthermore, destroying them would constitute an act of genocide against beings displaying clear signs of intelligence and consciousness." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone with official authority was seeing what she had known all along. These weren't monsters waiting to grow up and destroy worlds. They were children who deserved a chance to prove that their species could be something different than what their ancestors had been. Rex tugged at her sleeve again, and when she looked down, he gestured toward the communication console. Sarah realized he wanted to try something new. "What is it, Rex?" The baby dragon moved to the console and began a different kind of transmission. Not distress calls this time, but something that sounded like music. Within moments, all 37 hatchlings joined in, creating a symphony that reached every ship in the area. It was a song of gratitude, recognizing all those who had come to protect them. And across the galaxy, hundreds of beings found themselves wiping away tears as they listened to the music of baby dragons saying thank you. The Galactic Court hearing was being broadcast live across every inhabited system in the galaxy. Sarah stood in the center of the massive courtroom, surrounded by representatives from hundreds of species, while the 37 hatchlings remained safely aboard the research station under the protection of Fleet Admiral Kora's ships. Chief Justice Antara, an ancient being whose species had been mediating galactic disputes for millennia, presided over the proceedings. Her crystalline form refracted light in patterns that indicated deep contemplation as she reviewed the evidence presented over the past 6 hours. Admiral Vextar had just finished his presentation, displaying holographic recordings of the devastation caused by adult draconians. Entire cities reduced to slag, orbital stations cracked open like eggs, and the charred remains of 17 worlds. His argument was simple and brutal. The galaxy could not risk allowing even one draconian to reach maturity. These creatures, Vextar concluded, pointing to an image of an adult dragon in full rage, are biological weapons of mass destruction. Their young may appear harmless now, but they will inevitably develop the same capabilities that allowed their species to terrorize the galaxy for 3 centuries. Now it was Sarah's turn. She activated her own holographic display, showing the footage recorded during the past week aboard the research station. The courtroom fell silent as images of baby dragons playing, learning, and caring for each other filled the massive space. "Your Honor, what we see here challenges everything we thought we knew about draconian nature," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "These hatchlings demonstrate empathy, cooperation, and intelligence that far exceeds their parents' demonstrated behaviors." She showed the recording of the healing song, the organized protection of weaker siblings, and Rex's remarkable ability to interface with technology to communicate with other species. The gallery murmured in amazement as they watched the baby dragons work together to solve problems and comfort each other. But more importantly, Sarah continued, Dr. Voss's medical examination revealed something crucial about draconian biology that we never understood before. The chief medical officer stepped forward to present his findings. "Your Honor, extensive genetic analysis of these hatchlings reveals that their destructive capabilities are not inevitable. The plasma generation organs, enhanced muscle density, and aggressive neural pathways that characterize the adult draconians appear to be environmentally triggered, not genetically predetermined." The courtroom erupted in surprised voices as the implications became clear. Dr. Voss continued his explanation. In simple terms, the Draconians became living weapons because they were raised in an environment of constant warfare and territorial competition. Isolated from their family groups and forced into survival situations, their biology adapted to produce the traits we feared. But these hatchlings, raised in a peaceful environment with proper care, show no signs of developing those same characteristics. Admiral Vextar stood abruptly. Speculation and wishful thinking. You cannot prove these creatures won't become dangerous? Actually, we can, Dr. Kim interjected, approaching the court with a datapad. We've discovered references to peaceful draconian settlements in ancient archives from the Zephyrian libraries. Before the Great Territorial Wars began 500 years ago, Draconians were known as philosophers and artists, not destroyers. She activated a holographic display showing ancient artwork and architectural fragments. These ruins on the abandoned world of Kepler 442b show clear signs of draconian civilization. Not fortresses or weapons facilities, but schools, art galleries, and what appear to be childcare centers designed specifically for young draconians. The evidence was compelling, but Sarah knew that fear and prejudice would be harder to overcome than scientific data. She made a decision that would either save the hatchlings or destroy any chance they had for survival. Your Honor, I request permission to establish a live communication link with the research station. Chief Justice Antara considered the request. For what purpose, Dr. Chen? I want the court to hear directly from the beings we're deciding the fate of. Admiral Vextar objected immediately. This is highly irregular. Allowing the subjects of the hearing to influence the proceedings is exactly what we should do, interrupted Ambassador Vasquez. If these beings are intelligent enough to communicate, don't they have the right to speak for themselves? The Chief Justice made her decision. Permission granted. Establish the link. The massive display screen in the courtroom flickered to life, showing the interior of the research station's shelter. The 37 hatchlings were arranged in their now familiar spiral pattern, with Rex at the center near the communication console. Sarah spoke gently into her communicator. Rex, can you hear me? We're in a big room with many different people who need to understand that you and your family are not dangerous. The baby dragon looked directly into the camera with his large, intelligent eyes. Then he began to sing. Not the distress call that had first reached across space, nor the healing song that had saved his siblings, but something entirely new. The melody was complex and beautiful, with harmonies that spoke of peace, curiosity, and hope. One by one, the other hatchlings joined in, their voices creating a symphony that needed no translation. It was a song of introduction, of greeting, of a species asking for the chance to prove they could be friends rather than enemies. The effect on the courtroom was immediate and profound. Sarah watched as even the most skeptical representatives began to wipe away tears. Admiral Vextar himself seemed shaken by the obvious intelligence and emotion in the hatchling's music. But Rex wasn't finished. As the song ended, he moved closer to the camera and began making specific vocal patterns that Sarah recognized. He was attempting to learn the universal translator language, trying to speak in a way the court could understand. Peace, came the halting translation as Rex struggled with unfamiliar sounds. We want peace. Please. No. Hurt. Family. The baby dragon was begging for their lives in words he had just learned, speaking for an entire species that had never been given a chance to speak for itself. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Chief Justice Antara's crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated deep emotion. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of history. In 5,000 years of mediating disputes between sentient species, I have never witnessed anything like what we have seen here today. These beings have demonstrated intelligence, empathy, communication skills, and a clear desire for peaceful coexistence. She paused, looking directly at Admiral Vextar. Admiral, your fears about draconian aggression are understandable given past history, but we cannot condemn an entire species based on the actions of their ancestors, especially when we now understand that their destructive behavior was environmentally induced rather than genetically inevitable. Admiral Vextar made one final attempt. Your Honor, what guarantee do we have that these creatures won't revert to their species' violent nature? Chief Justice Antara turned to the display screen, where Rex and the other hatchlings waited anxiously for the decision that would determine their fate. The same guarantee we have for any intelligent species, Admiral. The guarantee that comes from treating them with respect, providing them with proper education and care, and giving them the opportunity to choose their own path. She raised her ceremonial staff, and her crystalline form flared with brilliant light. The court rules that the draconian hatchlings pose no immediate threat to galactic security, and shall be granted full protection under the Rights of Sentient Beings Act. Furthermore, I am ordering the establishment of a supervised sanctuary where these young dragons can be raised in safety while their true nature is allowed to develop. The courtroom erupted in cheers from supporters, while Admiral Vextar and several council representatives stormed out in protest. But Sarah barely heard any of it. She was watching the screen as 37 baby dragons celebrated with joyful songs, finally understanding that they would be allowed to live. Rex looked directly into the camera and spoke one more word in the universal translator language. Thank you. 6 months had passed since the court ruling, and the dragon sanctuary on the peaceful world of Haven 7 was thriving beyond Sarah's wildest dreams. What had started as a simple shelter had grown into something magnificent, a sprawling complex of interconnected domes and natural habitats designed specifically for raising young draconians. Sarah walked through the main habitat, watching as the hatchlings, now the size of large dogs, explored their environment with boundless curiosity. Their scales had developed into brilliant arrays of colors that seemed to reflect their individual personalities. Rex's scales had settled into a deep blue with silver edges, while his sister Luna displayed beautiful patterns of green and gold. The dragons had grown not just physically, but intellectually and emotionally. They had learned to communicate fluently in the universal translator language and had begun developing their own written script, a flowing combination of symbols and musical notations that captured both meaning and emotion. Dr. Chen called Dr. Rodriguez as he approached with a datapad. You need to see the latest cognitive development tests. Rex just scored higher than the baseline for adult intelligence in 3 different species. Sarah smiled as she watched Rex working with a group of younger dragons, teaching them how to interface with the sanctuary's computer systems. The young draconian had become an unofficial leader among his clutchmates, not through dominance but through patience and understanding. And Luna's artistic abilities are remarkable, Dr. Rodriguez continued, showing Sarah a holographic display of sculptures created using controlled plasma formation. She's learned to manipulate thermal energy with such precision that she can create art at the molecular level. The development of plasma abilities in the young dragons had been a source of great concern initially. Admiral Vextar and his supporters had claimed vindication when the first signs appeared 3 months ago. But rather than destructive weapons, the dragons had developed their plasma capabilities into tools for creation and healing. Dr. Sarah called a familiar voice. Sarah turned to see Pip, one of the smallest dragons, running toward her on his 4 legs while his wings provided balance. At 6 months old, Pip was about the size of a medium dog and had become something of a comedian among the group. His scales were a bright orange with purple spots that shifted position based on his mood. What is it, Pip? Sarah asked, kneeling down to the young dragon's level. Rex says we have visitors coming. Important visitors from far away. Pip's excitement was evident in the way his scales shimmered with additional colors. Sarah looked up to see Rex approaching with his measured, dignified gait. Even at 6 months old, he carried himself with an authority that commanded respect from both dragons and humans alike. Dr. Chen, Rex said in his carefully modulated voice, my siblings and I have been monitoring the communication frequencies. There are delegations arriving from 17 different worlds, including some who supported Admiral Vextar's position. They're coming to evaluate our progress. Sarah felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. The sanctuary existed under the protection of the Galactic Court, but that protection depended on the dragons continuing to prove they posed no threat. If these visiting delegations found any evidence of dangerous behavior, the court's ruling could be overturned. Rex, how do you and the others feel about being evaluated again? The young dragon's scales shifted to deeper, more contemplative colors. We understand the necessity, Dr. Chen. Our species' past actions created fear that must be overcome with evidence of our true nature. We are prepared to demonstrate our commitment to peace and cooperation. Luna approached, her graceful movements causing light to dance off her iridescent scales. Dr. Sarah, we've been working on something special for the visitors. a gift that shows what our species can become when raised in love instead of fear. Over the next 2 days, delegations arrived from across the galaxy. Admiral Vextar came with a team of military analysts, clearly hoping to find evidence that would justify his original position. But there were also scientists, artists, and philosophers representing dozens of species, all curious to see what had become of the supposedly dangerous draconian hatchlings. The formal presentation took place in the sanctuary's central amphitheater, a natural depression surrounded by flowering trees that the dragons had helped design. Sarah stood before the assembled delegates, feeling the weight of responsibility for 37 young lives. "Honored guests," she began. "6 months ago, these young dragons were condemned to death before they had even opened their eyes. Today, I invite you to meet them as individuals and judge for yourselves what they have become." Rex stepped forward, now tall enough that his head reached Sarah's shoulder. His blue and silver scales caught the afternoon sunlight as he addressed the gathered delegates in perfect, universal standard. "Honored beings of many worlds, I speak for my clutch siblings and for the hope of our species. We know that our ancestors caused great pain and destruction across the galaxy. We cannot change that history, but we can choose a different future." He gestured, and the other 36 dragons arranged themselves in a complex formation around the amphitheater. What followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, a combination of music, art, and storytelling that used every sense to convey meaning. The dragons sang in harmonies that created visual patterns in the air, their controlled plasma abilities forming temporary sculptures that illustrated their words. They told the story of their species' past, acknowledging the pain their ancestors had caused while explaining the environmental factors that had led to such violence. Then they shared their vision for the future. Luna stepped forward and began creating a plasma sculpture that showed dragons and other species working together, teaching in schools, healing in hospitals, building cities that floated among the stars. Her thermal control was so precise that she could create 3-dimensional images with different temperatures, allowing the delegates to feel the warmth of hope and the cool clarity of peaceful intentions. Pip and several of the younger dragons performed a comedy routine that had everyone laughing, demonstrating that play and joy were as important to dragon development as learning and growth. Their childlike wonder and innocent humor made it impossible to see them as potential threats. But it was the final presentation that truly moved the audience. The entire clutch combined their abilities to create a living memorial to all those who had died in the conflicts with their ancestors. The plasma sculpture showed faces, names, and brief histories of the victims, while the dragons' voices sang a lament for lives lost and futures stolen. "We remember them," Rex said solemnly as the memorial faded. "We carry the weight of our species' actions, but we choose to bear that weight through service to others, rather than through further violence." The amphitheater fell silent. Sarah watched as even Admiral Vextar wiped tears from his reptilian eyes. The dragons had done something remarkable. They had acknowledged their history while demonstrating that they could transcend it. Ambassador Chen of the Terran Federation was the first to speak. "Young Rex, what would you and your siblings like to do when you reach adulthood?" Rex's scales shifted to warm, hopeful colors. "Some of us wish to become teachers, sharing knowledge across species barriers. Others want to be healers, using our thermal abilities to help rather than harm. Luna dreams of creating art that brings different worlds together. Pip wants to make people laugh and find joy in life." He paused, looking at each delegate in turn. "We want to prove that dragons can be guardians instead of destroyers, that we can protect life rather than ending it. Give us that chance and we will spend our lives honoring your trust." Admiral Vextar stood slowly, his bearing showing the conflict between his military training and what he was witnessing. "Young dragon, when you reach full size and power, what would prevent you from reverting to your ancestors' ways?" Rex's answer was simple and profound. "The same thing that prevents you from becoming a monster, Admiral. Love, hope, and the knowledge that we are part of something larger than ourselves. You have shown us what it means to belong to a galactic community. Why would we destroy the only family we have ever known?" The voting was unanimous. Every delegation, including Admiral Vextar's military observers, recommended that the dragons be granted full citizenship rights and the freedom to choose their own futures. The species that had once been feared as destroyers of worlds would be allowed to grow up as protectors of peace. 25 years had transformed the galaxy in ways no one could have imagined. Sarah, now graying at the temples but still energetic, stood in the observation deck of the Harmony Station, watching as Rex, now a magnificent adult dragon, carefully guided a damaged cargo ship to safety using precisely controlled plasma beams. The young hatchling who had once fit in her arms was now 18 feet long, with wings that could span 40 feet when fully extended. His scales had deepened to a rich sapphire blue with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift and flow with his emotions. But despite his imposing size, his movements remained gentle and measured, especially when working around smaller beings. Cargo vessel wanderer, this is Rex of the Dragon Rescue Corps. His deep voice resonated through the communication system. I'm extending a plasma tether to your port docking array. Please maintain minimal thrust until we reach the repair dock. Sarah smiled as she watched him work. Rex had become the leader of an elite rescue organization staffed entirely by adult draconians. Their unique abilities made them perfect for space rescue operations. They could survive in vacuum for extended periods. Their plasma breath could cut through damaged hull sections or weld emergency patches, and their incredible strength allowed them to move debris that would require massive equipment for other species to handle. Dr. Chen, came a familiar, cheerful voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Pip approaching. Now an impressive dragon himself, though smaller than Rex. His orange scales with purple spots had evolved into a complex pattern that seemed to tell jokes through color alone. He had become the galaxy's first stand-up comedian dragon, and his performances drew audiences from hundreds of worlds. Pip, I thought you were performing on Centauri Prime this week. I was, but I got back early for the ceremony. You know, Luna would never forgive me if I missed her big day. Pip's scales shifted to warm, affectionate hues. Besides, I had to try out my new material on Rex first. You know how he is about my timing. Through the observation window, they watched as Rex successfully guided the damaged cargo ship into the repair dock. His precision was absolute. Not a single spark of stray plasma escaped his control, and the delicate maneuvering was completed without even minor hull scratches. He's gotten even better, Sarah observed. I remember when he was learning to control his plasma abilities and accidentally melted a hole through the sanctuary's kitchen wall. And now he can perform microsurgery with plasma beams, Pip added proudly. Did you hear about the operation he assisted with last month? Dr. Voss said Rex's thermal control was more precise than their best medical equipment. The rescue operation complete. Rex transformed from his working mode back to his social demeanor and flew gracefully toward the observation deck. Sarah always marveled at how the adult dragons had developed the ability to make themselves seem less intimidating when interacting with smaller species. Rex folded his wings carefully and lowered his massive head to Sarah's level. Dr. Chen, it's wonderful to see you again. How are the new hatchlings at the sanctuary adjusting? Sarah's heart warmed at his continued concern for others. The sanctuary on Haven 7 had become a model for interspecies cooperation, now housing not just the original draconian clutch, but also orphaned young from dozens of species. Rex and his siblings visited regularly, serving as mentors and protectors for the next generation. They're doing beautifully. Little Zara from the Rigelian clutch has started making friends with the human children, and the Andromedan twins are learning to paint with plasma just like Luna taught them. Good, Rex said, his scales shifting to satisfied greens and golds. Every young being deserves the chance to grow up in peace regardless of their species' history. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's command center. Admiral Torres, a human who had replaced Admiral Vexistar as head of galactic security, appeared on the emergency channel. Rex, Dr. Chen, we have a situation developing in the Kestrel system. A hegemony battle fleet has violated the peace accords and is threatening the civilian colonies. They're demanding tribute in exchange for not bombarding the surface. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The hegemony was a collection of aggressive species that had been testing galactic resolve for months, apparently believing that the emphasis on peace and cooperation had made the galaxy weak. Rex's scales shifted to deeper, more serious colors. Admiral, what is the composition of their fleet? 12 heavy cruisers and 47 escort vessels. Standard hegemony configuration. Maximum firepower, minimal defensive capabilities. They're banking on intimidation and overwhelming force. Pip's usual cheerfulness faded as his scales took on more muted tones. Rex, that's a lot of ships. Even with the entire rescue corps, we couldn't handle that many. But Rex was already moving, his massive form graceful despite its size. Admiral Torres, please contact Luna, Sage, Echo, and the other members of the Guardian Wing. Tell them to meet us at the jump point. And Admiral, inform the Hegemony fleet that they have one chance to withdraw peacefully. Rex, Sarah called after him, be careful. These aren't damaged ships that need rescue. These are warships intent on violence. The great dragon paused and looked back at her with eyes that held both ancient wisdom and the warmth of the young hatchling she had once protected. Dr. Chen, 25 years ago, you risked everything to show the galaxy that we could be more than our ancestors' legacy. Now it's time for us to prove that dragons can be guardians as well as destroyers. Within hours, the story was being broadcast across every inhabited world. 37 adult draconians, led by Rex, had intercepted the Hegemony fleet at the edge of the Kestrel system. What followed challenged every assumption about power, violence, and the true meaning of strength. The Hegemony commander, expecting easy victory over peaceful dragons, launched an immediate attack. But the dragons didn't respond with the devastating plasma barrages their ancestors might have used. Instead, they demonstrated precision and restraint that redefined the concept of overwhelming force. Rex and his siblings moved through the enemy formation like artists creating a masterpiece. Luna's plasma beams targeted specific weapon systems, disabling guns without harming crew compartments. Sage used his incredible speed to position himself between enemy ships and the civilian colonies, his massive form serving as a living shield. Echo coordinated the entire operation with tactical brilliance that impressed military observers throughout the galaxy. But it was Rex who provided the moment that would be remembered for generations. When the Hegemony flagship attempted to ram one of the civilian evacuation ships, Rex intercepted it with his own body, absorbing the impact that would have killed thousands. Then, instead of retaliating, he carefully used his plasma breath to weld the enemy ship's weapons permanently shut, while leaving life support completely intact. In less than an hour, the entire Hegemony fleet was disabled without a single casualty on either side. The dragons had demonstrated power beyond anything their ancestors had possessed, but they had used it to protect rather than destroy, to disable rather than kill. The Hegemony commander's final transmission was broadcast throughout the galaxy. We came here expecting to face dragons like those in the old stories. Instead, we found something far more powerful. Dragons who choose mercy over vengeance, protection over destruction. We surrender not to your weapons, but to your wisdom. Sarah watched the coverage from the sanctuary on Haven 7, surrounded by young beings of dozens of species who had grown up believing that strength meant protecting others, rather than destroying them. Rex and his siblings had become exactly what she had hoped they could be. Guardians of the galaxy's children, protectors of the innocent, living proof that any being could transcend their origins and choose their own destiny. The little hatchling who had once tugged at her sleeve, asking for protection, had grown into a force for peace that would inspire generations across the stars. 50 years had passed since Sarah Chen first held a frightened dragon hatchling in her arms. Now, at 93, she sat in her favorite chair in the memorial garden on Haven 7, watching the newest generation of dragons play among flowers that bloomed in every color imaginable. Her hair was white as snow, her hands weathered with age, but her eyes still sparkled with the same curiosity and determination that had once defied an entire galactic council. Rex, now an elder dragon whose scales had taken on the deep, lustrous quality that came with age and wisdom, rested nearby. At 50 years old, he was considered to be in his prime, though dragons were known to live for centuries. His children and grandchildren played in the garden around them, their joyful chirps and songs creating a symphony of innocence that echoed through the peaceful afternoon. "Tell us the story again." "Great Mother," called Stella, one of Rex's granddaughters, as she bounded over with a group of young dragons of various species trailing behind her. Stella's scales were a brilliant mixture of her father's blue and her mother's silver, creating patterns that seemed to shift like flowing water. Sarah smiled at the title the dragons had given her decades ago. She had become not just the protector of one clutch, but the symbolic grandmother to an entire renewed species. "Which story would you like to hear, little star?" "The beginning story," chirped several young voices at once. "Tell us about the day you saved our great-grandfather." Rex raised his massive head and looked at Sarah with affection that had deepened over 5 decades of friendship. "Dr. Chen, you don't need to—" "Nonsense," Sarah interrupted gently. These little ones deserve to know their history. She settled back in her chair as 24 young dragons arranged themselves in a perfect listening circle, just as their ancestors had done 50 years ago. It began, Sarah started, her voice still strong despite her advanced age, with 37 eggs that the entire galaxy wanted to destroy. They thought that dragon babies would grow up to be monsters, just like their great-great-grandparents had been. But I looked at those eggs and I couldn't help wondering, what if they were wrong? As she spoke, holographic displays materialized around the garden, showing scenes from that long-ago crisis. The young dragons watched in fascination as images of their great-grandfather as a tiny hatchling appeared, no bigger than the smallest of them now. Great-grandfather was so small, gasped Pip Jr., who had inherited his namesake's bright orange scales and mischievous personality. How did he become so brave? He was always brave, Sarah replied, her eyes twinkling. But more importantly, he was kind. When his siblings were sick, he sang healing songs. When they were scared, he protected them. When they needed to speak for their species, he learned a new language just to say, "Please don't hurt my family." Rex's scales shifted to the warm, golden tones that indicated deep emotion. "Dr. Chen, you've always given me too much credit. I was just trying to keep my siblings alive. And in doing so, you saved your entire species," Sarah replied. "You showed the galaxy that dragons could choose compassion over conquest." Young Stella crawled closer to Sarah's chair. "Great Mother, what happened to Admiral Vextar? The one who wanted to destroy the eggs?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "Admiral Vextar spent the last 30 years of his life working at dragon sanctuaries across the galaxy. He said that watching your great-grandfather grow up taught him that fear should never be stronger than hope. When he died 10 years ago, Rex spoke at his funeral. He wasn't a bad person," Rex added gently. "He was just afraid of repeating the mistakes of the past. It took time for him to understand that the future doesn't have to look like the past." The story session was interrupted by the arrival of Luna, now a renowned artist whose thermal sculptures graced museums on hundreds of worlds. Her scales had evolved into an incredible array of colors that seemed to contain entire galaxies within their depths. "Sarah." "Rex," she called as she landed gracefully in the garden. "You need to see the latest reports from the exploration fleets." She activated a communication device, and the image of Captain Yuki Tanaka appeared. Captain Tanaka was the leader of the joint human-dragon exploration mission that had been searching for signs of surviving draconian populations in the far reaches of the galaxy. "Dr. Chen." "Rex, Luna," Captain Tanaka said excitedly. "We found them. 3 separate populations of wild draconians, isolated on distant worlds. They've been living peacefully for centuries, developing art and philosophy. They never became the warriors their cousins did. The implications were staggering. The original 37 hatchlings weren't the last of their species after all. There were others who had always lived the peaceful existence that Rex and his siblings had had to learn." "Captain?" Rex asked, his voice filled with wonder. "What are they like?" "They're everything you proved your species could become," Captain Tanaka replied. "Gentle, intelligent, artistic. They've been waiting centuries for the galaxy to be ready to meet them again. When they heard about what you accomplished, they decided it was finally safe to make contact." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized the full magnitude of what had been achieved. Not only had the original clutch survived and thrived, but they had paved the way for their entire species to rejoin galactic civilization. Over the next few months, delegations of wild draconians arrived at Haven 7. They were slightly different from Rex's line, having evolved in isolation, but they shared the same fundamental nature of curiosity and compassion. They brought with them songs that had been sung for centuries, art forms that had never been seen by other species, and wisdom that came from generations of peaceful living. The reunion was everything Sarah could have hoped for and more. She watched as Rex met his distant cousins, sharing stories and learning about the paths their species might have taken if not for the ancient wars. The young dragons played together as if they had never been separated, their natural kinship transcending the centuries of isolation. As the sun set on her 94th birthday, Sarah sat in her garden surrounded by over 200 dragons of all ages. They had come from across the galaxy to celebrate with the woman they all considered their great mother. The celebration culminated in the most beautiful dragon song ever performed, a composition that told the story of one human who refused to give up hope. Rex approached her as the evening wound down, his massive form moving with the careful grace he had learned around smaller beings. "Dr. Chen, I have something to tell you. The Galactic Council has voted to establish the Sarah Chen Institute for Interspecies Understanding. It will study how beings can overcome their genetic and cultural programming to become something better than what they were designed to be." Sarah chuckled softly. "Rex, I'm not sure I deserve such an honor. I just did what anyone should have done when they saw babies who needed help." "But that's exactly why you deserve it," Rex replied. "Not everyone would have risked everything to save beings that the entire galaxy feared. You saw past our ancestors' mistakes to the potential for what we could become." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started as one terrified woman protecting 37 helpless hatchlings had evolved into a transformation of galactic civilization itself. The dragons had become teachers, healers, artists, explorers, and guardians. They served in schools, hospitals, research stations, and rescue operations across thousands of worlds. Their children grew up alongside beings from dozens of species, learning that diversity was strength and that every being had the potential for greatness. But more importantly, they had proved that the future didn't have to repeat the mistakes of the past, that fear could be overcome by understanding, that prejudice could be defeated by experience, and that even the most terrifying beings could become forces for good when shown love instead of hatred. Sarah Chen had saved 37 baby dragons from destruction. In return, they had saved the galaxy from its own worst instincts, proving that hope would always be more powerful than fear, and that the greatest strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the choice to protect and nurture life. As she drifted off to sleep in her chair, surrounded by the gentle breathing of sleeping dragons and the soft glow of bioluminescent flowers, Sarah smiled. The shelter she had built for frightened hatchlings had become a beacon of hope that shone across the entire galaxy, reminding all beings that with courage, compassion, and faith in the possibility of redemption, any future was possible.